Hey guys, welcome back for our next lecture in the series on Latin American revolutions. Today we're going to be exploring the second phase of these Latin American revolutions, and we'll see the emergence of a new hero. Last time we talked about Simón Bolivar. This time we're going to be talking about José de San Martín, who will be active in the southern part of South America. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into it. And we'll go ahead and get back to it. So once again, as I kind of like to joke, pretty much everything that is happening during this period of history is caused by Napoleon. And so last time we saw how Napoleon's events in Europe had really kind of upset the balance of power in empires throughout the world, but in the Spanish Empire in particular. So let's take a look at what's happening here. So events in Europe really kind of dictate what's happening over in Latin America. Now, we had seen Napoleon kind of betray the Spanish by his invasion with the Peninsular War. He had overthrown Ferdinand the Seventh in 1807. He is going to be put down by a multinational force in 1813. And even though Napoleon would rule 2 more years before being ultimately ousted, his brother was deposed, Joseph I was deposed, and like I said, eventually Napoleon would be deposed himself in 1815 and exiled and eventually die in 1821. So back to the main events here, though. With this multinational force that ultimately would put Napoleon down, events in Spain looked like they were turning around by 1812. And so there was a new constitution that was written during the war itself, during this Peninsular War itself. Spain's first national sovereign assembly passed a constitution which called for things like universal male suffrage, national sovereignty, a constitutional monarchy. So again, you have a king or queen, but they are constrained in what they can do by a constitution, which sets up the rest of the government. They also supported things like freedom of the press and land reform and free enterprise. For the most part, these are very liberal ideas for the time period. I would say the only exception, the more conservative thing they do hold on to, was proclaiming that the Catholic Church was the official and sole religion of Spain. But for the most part, everything else was fairly liberal in the traditional sense of the term. Now, the impact they would have on the colonies is that these territories that they've previously had are converted to provinces. Okay, now that might seem like not a big change, but what that meant was that taxes raised in those colonies would go to the state administration versus the royal treasury. Okay, so becoming provinces instead of territories meant that they basically kept the tax money that they raised, and this was obviously a major benefit for those colonies. So, the Constitution of 1812, which we are going to refer to quite a bit after this. Sorry, I realized I didn't click here. It was a tremendous benefit for the colonies, and in particular those Creoles within those colonies who gain a lot of kind of benefits over the Peninsulares, which is what they've been pushing for. So sorry, I just clicked a little bit late there. So moving on to the next major event. So after the deposing of Joseph I, Ferdinand VII does make his return, March of 1814. When he comes back, he does promise to uphold this 1812 Constitution. Even though it would limit his own power, he does kind of recognize the fact that this is what the people want and recognizes it for a solid 2 months. After that 2 months, he's realizing, wait a second, we're not making any money, and decides to abolish it, arrest those that had collaborated in making it, and basically cause Spain to dive into a civil war of its own. So now all of a sudden you have the split in this nation between constitutionalists and absolute monarchists. And like I said, it really comes down to money. Once Ferdinand realizes the full impact of this taxation issue, he kind of goes backwards on it and does not want to support this constitution. So, once again, you think about how this is being reacted to in the colonies. So, this was a major victory for the Creoles that had pushed for a lot of these wars. And, to now be told 2 months later that, oh, we're going back, we're not doing it that way anymore. That was something that greatly upset them. And so, the same split that's happening in Spain between constitutionalists and absolute monarchists is now happening in the colonies as well. So, as I said, we're going to see the rise of a new leader, in particular beginning in Chile. But the man we're referring to here, Jose de San Martin, his biography, he was born there in Argentina in 1778. He did move to Spain at the age of 6, and he grew up there in Spain. Colleagues refer to him as meticulous and very careful and very modest. He did serve, his father was in the Spanish army, and San Martin would actually join and fight for Spain in those peninsular wars against Napoleon, and he earned a very solid reputation during that time. He had some very, very big influences in his life. He met many Creoles, including men like Bernardo O'Higgins, who was living in exile in Spain after the disaster of Rancagua. It's while he's in Spain that San Martin is exposed to those Enlightenment philosophies. He's reading men like Locke, and he desires major reforms, not only in Spain itself, but also in the colonies as well. So he decides that Chile is going to be the main focus, even though he was born in Argentina. We'll get there eventually, but Chile is going to be kind of the first main focus. San Martin will make contact in 1808 with the Buenos Aires military forces that are in Argentina, and he believes that the only way for Argentine independence involved liberation of the entire continent. So his ultimate goal is to liberate his own home country, but he does understand that you have to basically free the rest of the continent before Argentina can be liberated. In 1814, he will leave an army position to become governor of an Andean province of Cuyo, Cuyyo, as you can see there. He does become governor there, and it's during this period as governor that he kind of develops the goal, as I mentioned, of liberation for the entire continent. He realizes he's going to have to limit the support in the colonies for the royalists, and all of that support was coming from mainly one location, and that was Peru. Peru will consistently be the main royalist faction in South America. The Spanish royalists control Peru. And so San Martin realizes to liberate Chile, to liberate Argentina, he is going to have to defeat Peru. So he raises up an army, and they become known as the Army of the Andes. And basically, to get to Peru, he can either take the main routes or he can launch a surprise attack, and that would be to cross some very hazardous terrain, those Andes Mountains, and basically come in the back door with Peru not expecting it at all, and that's exactly what he ends up doing. So he will end up establishing this army. O'Higgins, who I had just mentioned, is named Brigadier General. He mobilizes 5,000 troops in January of 1817 to move towards Peru. They take 5,000 men and they march through the Andes Mountains. Now, this was a surprising move because the Andes Mountains are some of the highest mountains in the entire world. It took 25 days, 5,000 men. In fact, in some areas, it was so narrow that they could only stand 2 men side by side. So imagine what it would look like, 5,000 men, standing in just frankly 2 columns. This was a line that extended for miles. And beyond that, the treacherous terrain, it's also extremely cold. The elevation here, it's about 12,000 feet above sea level. You might have seen pictures of Machu Picchu, and Machu Picchu, the city up in the clouds, this Incan village. That's actually at 8,000 feet. So they're actually marching 4,000 feet above even where Machu Picchu is at 8,000. They move into Chile at first. They're going to kind of sweep up north towards Peru. And so the liberation of South America starts with Chile, and they are able to capture the capital there of Santiago fairly easily. Nobody saw them really coming. The you have to at that point set up a government, and so there's kind of an interim government. San Martin will leave O'Higgins behind, and he will, they wanted San Martin to be governor. He refuses twice. Twice he refuses to become governor. He understands that this was just kind of the first action of liberation. The goal was not just Chile. So they liberate Chile. He leaves O'Higgins, who takes on the title of Supreme Dictator. That seems to happen a lot with the liberation of South American countries, and frankly, that would be a trend that would continue well into the 20th century. So O'Higgins is left behind there. We'll come back to him at a later moment. But ultimately, Chilean independence is secured fully by April 1818, and the remaining royalists that did live in the country are defeated. O'Higgins would remain as ruler there for 5 years, committing himself and the country to independence. A lot of positive reforms, including education and ending, kind of the privileged status of the peninsulares. But one criticism of O'Higgins is that he was very distrustful of democracy. He didn't necessarily think that the people can make the best choices for themselves. And so, frankly, because of that, people they kind of lose support, or at least lose trust in O'Higgins to make all of these. So he really never establishes that strong political base that he actually needs. Now, again, the San Martin would continue north and head into that main royalist stronghold. So the next stop was Peru. Now, in August of 1820, he has now united this group of Argentines and Chileans, and he renames the army the United Army. And so this United Army will head into Peru, where they are vastly outnumbered. They are outnumbered 4-1. And because of that, San Martin being a wise general, he will avoid major battles. We don't have too many major battles between the United Army and the Peruvian forces. He instead focuses on doing things like dividing the royalist forces and promoting rebellions and insurrection and promising things like emancipation. He knows if he could get slaves on board, that would be very positive for him. After the invasion of Peru in 1820, the Constitution of 1812 had taken effect in some areas. At least word arrives, that a mutiny in Spain has, and we'll cover this fully in detail later on, that basically there's been a mutiny in Spain, and that Ferdinand is basically forced to reinstall that Constitution of 1812 by March of 1820. And so that's a lot of what San Martin is fighting for. And so word kind of reaches Peru, hey, listen, this is happening back in Spain, and this was kind of our goal. So it's a major boost for San Martin, major blow to the royalist factions. By 1821, San Martin will capture or blockade many of the port cities, but frankly, he just lacks an overall support among Peruvians for full liberation. In Lima, the capital of Peru, there is a coup. San Martin is gaining strength. He's even though he doesn't have full support of the people, he's still gaining strength in Peru. He is basically marching towards the capital, and the leadership in Lima is becoming quite fearful of San Martin's impending invasion, and so. There is a coup that replaces the Peruvian leadership, who kind of offered negotiations to San Martin, but those negotiations fail. And San Martin is actually offered, hey, why don't you just follow the Constitution of 1812? But San Martin, kind of like Bolivar, says, no, the Constitution of 1812 isn't good enough now. That might have been fine at the beginning, but that is not ultimately what we want. We want full independence for Peru and ultimately for many of the nations surrounding it. So at this point, San Martin kind of has the upper hand. The government in Lima, in kind of a shocking move, they leave they abandon the entire city, and the government just kind of dissolves. And so in July of 1821, San Martin literally walks into the city with his army, and he's not really seen as a conqueror because of that. He's really seen as kind of a liberator. So cheering crowds meet him. Here he thought it was going to be this very tough fight, but now he's basically overturned the major royalist nation there. And knowing that Peru's going to take some work, he does decide to accept a government title. And he accepts this title called Chief of State, and the official title was Protector of Peru. But San Martin still doesn't control the entirety of the country, and frankly, he kind of lacks local leadership throughout the country. So, and he was not a politician. He was not a statesman. That was not his goal. And so, he really gets frustrated because he's not able to get a lot of the changes that he wants to take place, and he gets very frustrated with some of the problems of the government. In 1822, we have a meeting set up between the two major leaders of the Latin American revolutions, and that is San Martin and Simón Bolivar. Now, although Peru was independent of Spain at this point, royalists were still kind of roaming the countryside. Like I said, San Martin was having some problems fully uniting the country, and so he decides to meet with Bolivar in 1822 in the nation of Ecuador in order to discuss the liberation of the rest of Peru, seeing if Bolivar would like to help. And it's at this meeting that both men kind of sit down and discuss, what is their goals. And I put some of their main sentiments here on this chart to make it a little bit easier to understand. Both men, frankly, had somewhat similar goals in mind, but very different ways in order to get there. So, San Martin favored monarchy. He wanted a constitutional monarchy. He thought, and that makes sense, right? We saw, what had happened in Peru, where, had not really turned to democracy, supreme dictator and all, O'Higgins down in Chile. This was about, I know what's best for the country and moving forward, but he does push things like constitutional monarchy, and frankly is somewhat socially conservative, not completely wanting to get rid of all the class privileges, but still somewhat social conservative. In fact, at one point, he even talked about importing European princes to rule in Peru and Chile. And, he did have some good reason, I guess, to suggest this because, it's been chaos in South America this entire time, even after liberation. Thankfully in the United States, after our revolution, even then, with the Articles of Confederation, there was still a lot of chaos, and when the power was left to all the states, under the Articles of Confederation, it was pretty chaotic. And so eventually there were changes that had to be made for a more federalized, a stronger executive, things like that. San Martin's kind of reflecting that same thing, and frankly even more chaotic, I think mainly because of the geographic terrain and how far spread out South America is, but does not frankly believe that a Republican government is possible in a place like South America. Bolivar is the opposite. In fact, he says that you can have elections, you can have a republic in which people do vote for their leaders. But I guess one difference here is that he actually believed in what we could call autocratic republicanism, in which if you have a strong leader, that eventually they can choose what would be best for the nation. But he did believe in elections. He believed in democracy to some extent. But frankly, he says that whatever government will create the most happiness among the people and some kind of social stability and political stability, that is what's best for the people. It doesn't matter if it's really democracy or republicanism. It does not matter if it's whatever it is, as long as it creates stability. And so, these men, they kind of have differing opinions on what should be the future of South America. But Bolivar is going to continue pushing for South America. I think San Martin is getting frustrated by this point, and he does not necessarily think the liberation of the full continent is possible. But I think Bolivar kept that dream alive, and so he's going to continue to push through South America for full independence of the continent. San Martin is, frankly, as I said, frustrated with these difficulties, and so he is actually going to he's actually going to self-exile. He is going to leave Peru. He's going to sail for Europe to basically for retirement, and he would end up dying by 1850. The two men, this meeting, of the two major liberators, it could have been a united stance in which we could have seen that dream of Bolivar's united South America come to fruition. But, San Martin was just, frankly, too frustrated and did not believe that it was possible. I mentioned that he died in, San Martin died in 1850. There's a picture there you can see of San Martin later in his life. I think it's kind of exciting. We're getting to a time period where we can actually see some pictures of these guys before they did pass on. So I mentioned some of these this slide on the last slide more in detail, but eventually he would leave, and even though he helped liberate all those countries, San Martin would die in exile in Europe. So let's take a look at what Bolivar is doing. Before San Martin had crossed the Andes, Bolivar had been defeated in Venezuela, and we mentioned how he kind of fled. He had fled to New Granada, then Jamaica, then Haiti. When he gets to Haiti, he does seek help to liberate Venezuela, and promises the leadership in Haiti to free the slaves in those liberated countries. And so emancipation is a part of what Bolivar is pushing for at this point. So sorry, I have a problem with my notes. There we go. Okay. So at this point, by May of 1816, Bolivar reaches Venezuela. He returns to the continent, but he is unsuccessful in capturing Venezuela. And so he actually makes a secondary return to Haiti. He goes back. And part of this is because, 1816, this is right around that time that Ferdinand has returned to the throne, and he has actually sent over a large fighting force, the largest that we've seen yet from Spain, about 10,000 men, about 60 ships that Ferdinand has sent over to kind of reestablish, his absolute monarchy over the colonies, and Bolivar is just not prepared to fight that large of a force. In 1816, he does get some help from not only the Haitian president, who sent money and volunteers and weapons, but he actually gets help from the Llaneros that we had talked about in a previous lecture. But he does decide to capture kind of the surrounding countryside in Colombia, and then move on towards the capital, and that does prove to be a successful strategy. So the help of the Llaneros and the countryside, those cowboys, he is able to liberate most of Colombia, and in 1819 they create the Republic of Colombia with Bolivar elected as president, named General Commander-in-Chief. The nation of New Granada, he's not done at this point, and this is going to be part of Bolivar's undoing eventually, is that, even though he's named leader in these places, he takes off to continue his liberation of the rest of the continent. And so he moves on to this new area of New Granada. And this campaign will begin in May of 1819. And much like what we saw with San Martin, not as rugged of an area, he does take an army of about 2,000 men to cross the Andes Mountains. A lot of these soldiers get sick and die. In fact, they end up having to use a lot of the horses and cows for food. They're eating the horses because of the harsh terrain. There's a major battle that takes place in August of 1819, and this main battle is the Battle of Boyaca. And in this battle, Bolivar gets the Royalist armies to surrender, and this is kind of the final battle that does allow for Colombia to remain independent, and they're liberating parts of New Granada at the same time. And so this kind of guarantees New Granada, Colombia's independence from this point on. They do form a provisional government at this point, and they confiscate a lot of peninsular property after that. And so New Granada is liberated, this area in the northern part that makes up about 5 different nations, Colombia being part of that. And, his goal of trying to unite multiple regions is starting to come to fruition. So he announces this plan for what's called Gran Colombia. His idea is, let's unite the northern part of South America first, and then, eventually we can liberate the rest. In December of 1819, he announces this plan to unite Venezuela, New Granada, and Ecuador together into a single state of Gran Colombia. The problem was Ecuador wasn't conquered, and they still had a lot of royalist forces within it, really the other nations didn't give any indication that they actually wanted this. This is all just kind of Bolivar's brainchild. So Venezuela, New Granada, there's no evidence that they actually wanted to unite as a single nation. Ecuador had not been conquered, and really just nobody had really known what this plan was, and Bolivar just kind of announces it. And geography, the geographical, cultural divide. So, the people didn't necessarily want to be united into a single country. And geographically, you can see even by that map there, even the waterways, the rivers make it very difficult terrain, but a lot of jungle, a lot of dense jungle in this area. And so, there's just little in common between the people. They're culturally distant, geographically distant, and so this is going to be a tough battle for Bolivar to push to unite this northern part. By mid 1821, Venezuela has basically had its independence assured with the Battle of Carabobo, and at this point he does go ahead and call for a Congress to get together to create a constitution for Gran Colombia. There's a little bit more detailed map you can see of kind of his overall plan of what this Gran Colombia would look like. So it looks like Bolivar is actually going to do it. Even though he had a lot of roadblocks. So he calls together this constitutional assembly in 1821. The problem is hardly anybody showed up to actually write this constitution. And so basically Bolivar has to write the whole thing himself. And of course, as we've already seen, he kind of like San Martin suggested a strong centralized power where the executive would have a lot more power than the legislative branch. He does select Bogota as the capital and does have a bicameral Congress with representatives from each country making that up. So thinking that, they would kind of share the legislative load and, have more representation that way. Again, he is named president. He's kind of reluctantly named president because he wants to go off and fight and continue to liberate. So basically, he accepts it, but he does leave his vice president in charge right after this Gran Colombia has been created to go off and fight even more, in particular in Ecuador, to try and make sure that country is brought in. He is able to defeat the royalists in Ecuador by May of 1822 and is able to convince them in a somewhat uneasy alliance to join Gran Colombia. But like I said, there's a lot of dissension. There's, on paper this may have made sense, but in reality, no one was happy. Some wanted a strong centralized government, others wanted a strong executive, others wanted a federal government, others wanted a decentralized government. So there was a lot of disagreement, and the fact is Bolivar had dictated all this. This is one of the problems of governments that are set up without democracy, is that they do not really represent people's views when people are dictated what the government should look like. And so there's a lot of dissension, and ultimately Venezuela will kind of break Bolivar's heart because they start plotting on how to separate out from Gran Colombia, and the people ultimately kind of become resentful of Bolivar being gone, and so especially by the time that he's meeting with San Martin in this conference, and I don't think I used the official name in the previous slide, we discussed it. This is pronounced Guayaquil, the Guayaquil conference. Bolivar agrees with San Martin to help liberate Peru, and that's not what Gran Colombia wants to hear. Like, wait a second, now we're going down. We don't even have our own stuff figured out, and now you want to go down and invade another country. And so basically when Bolivar left to enter Peru, where he does so successfully, basically Gran Colombia splits apart. And when he's entering Peru, known as this man of liberty, that's the title they bestow upon him by the Peruvian Congress. He finds that there's a lot of corruption in the Peruvian government, and so Bolivar, he's trying to get Peru kind of involved. Like, hey, let's get everybody together. Let's starting to make plans to join them eventually in Gran Colombia. But Peru has enough problems in and of itself that they actually decide, against Bolivar's wishes, to split the country. And so they split into Upper Peru and then Lower Peru, which will just retain the name Peru. Today that country is known as Bolivia in the north. That used to be Upper Peru. So again, Bolivar is becoming increasingly frustrated because he's trying to unite people, but now these countries he's liberating are now dividing even further. And so he fails to establish a solid government in Peru. He's hearing about problems back up in Gran Colombia, factional disputes between Venezuela and New Granada, and so he returns in November to try and reestablish this unity up north. And by June of 1828, he is elected as dictator, but even the great Simon Bolivar is unable to fully unite people, and by September 1830. Gran Colombia does fall apart. Venezuela withdraws. Ecuador, who didn't really want to be in it in the first place, withdraws. And by this point, Bolivar has had a lifetime of fighting, which does wear on one's body. In 1830, he does set sail for, or at least makes plans to set sail for Europe to try and recover from tuberculosis that he has fallen ill to. But ultimately, he does die December 17th, 1830, before he could even leave for that. One interesting thing is that he instructed his second-in-command to burn all of his letters and his writings because there was a lot of personal information in those letters. But after Bolivar dies, his second-in-command actually goes against his dying wish and keeps those letters and writings. And so, sad for, I guess, Bolivar, his final wish was not granted, but good for us, the historians, that we are able to have access to that, which helps us know and understand a lot more about Bolivar and his overall philosophy and desires for a united South America. But the great liberator will be dead by 1830 at the age of 47 years old. Quite young to today's standards. Now, next time we will take a look at Mexico. We'll see an update of what's happening in that country in their push for independence. But I hope you guys enjoyed today's lecture. I know a lot of bouncing around, but as always, email me if you have any questions. Thanks.